Okay, let's dive into something that is, frankly, a massive deal for global security. For decades, there was a kind of rulebook that kept the world's most powerful weapons in check. Well, that rulebook has just been thrown out. We're going to break down what this new and pretty uncertain nuclear age really means.
And listen, that is not an exaggeration. It is the reality we're living in right now. For the first time since the 1970s, there are zero binding legal limits on the biggest nuclear forces on the planet. The guardrails that kept things stable for more than half a century, they're gone.
And this was the final pillar to fall, the New START Treaty. This was the very last arms control deal standing between the US and Russia. You know, the two countries that own over 90% of all nuclear weapons. With its expiration, a whole era of agreed restraint has officially ended.
Right, so it's one thing to talk about treaties in the abstract, but the end of New START has real, tangible consequences. Let's get specific about what just disappeared from the world stage.
First, let's talk numbers. The treaty capped both the US and Russia at 1,550 deployed strategic nuclear warheads. These are the big ones, the long-range weapons that can cross the globe in minutes. Now, that cap is just gone. Both sides are now totally free to pull hundreds of warheads out of storage and put them right back on their missiles, something the treaty specifically forbade.
And it wasn't just about the warheads themselves. The treaty also limited the number of delivery systems to 700. Think of these as the trucks, right? The intercontinental ballistic missiles, the submarines, the bombers that actually carry the warheads. This was designed to stop a race to just build more and more launchers. That limit, poof, gone too.
But really, the treaty was so much more than just numbers. Think of these protections as the eyes and ears of the agreement. Without on-site inspections and constant data swaps, you're basically flying blind. You have no way to verify what your rival is actually doing. Without a joint commission, there's no official phone line to call when things get tense. We lost the very machinery that built what little trust and transparency existed.
So, you have to ask, how did we get this whole system of rules in the first place? I mean, why would two bitter Cold War enemies ever agree to limit their most powerful weapons? To really get what we've lost, we got to look back at why these things were created.
It all started right here in 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't just a tense standoff. It was the moment humanity stared right into the nuclear abyss and didn't blink. That scare was so profound that it kicked off 5 decades of grueling, painstaking negotiations that built, piece by piece, a framework of stability. And now that entire framework is gone.
So what was the real point of all these agreements? It wasn't about making friends, it was all about cold, hard strategic benefits. Let's look at the 4 key advantages that made these deals absolutely essential for so long.
First up, predictability. See, without limits, military planners have to assume the absolute worst. They have to imagine their adversary is building as many weapons as physically possible, and that forces them to build more just to keep up. It's a spiral. Treaties put a ceiling on that paranoia.
Next, transparency. Those inspections and data exchanges we mentioned, they were everything. They gave each side a clear, verified snapshot of what the other guy had. You didn't have to guess or rely on spies. You had the data. And that is so important for reducing the risk of a catastrophic miscalculation in a crisis.
The third big one is stability. The agreements often ban the most dangerous types of weapons, like missiles with a bunch of warheads on them. Why? Because those weapons create a use-it-or-lose-it dilemma. They give you a massive incentive to strike first in a crisis, to wipe out your enemy's arsenal. Taking those off the table made everyone breathe a little easier.
And finally, there's a huge diplomatic benefit. Just the act of negotiating and signing a treaty sends a powerful signal. It says, okay, maybe you're not an enemy bent on my total destruction. It dials down the intense hostility that can fuel a crisis and lead to a mistake. It builds a foundation of communication.
And look, this wasn't some fringe idea. Even when you account for the fact that Russia sometimes cheated on past deals, the broad consensus among security experts was clear. These agreements, on balance, worked. They drastically cut down the world's nuclear stockpiles and made everyone safer.
So if these treaties were so great, you're probably wondering, why not just make a new one? Well, because the world has fundamentally changed. The strategic game board looks nothing like it did during the Cold War.
For 50 years, nuclear strategy was basically a 2-player chess match. Tense, but you knew the players and the rules. Now, a third major player has pulled up a chair to the board, and the old rulebook just doesn't apply. It's a whole new game now.
And this is that new reality. Arms control used to be a US-Russia thing, but now you have China, which is in the middle of a breakneck expansion of its nuclear forces. They're not just building a few more, they're aiming for parity. This completely upends the entire strategic calculation.
And on top of that, you've got all this new tech that's blurring the lines. I mean, how do you even begin to control for super precise conventional missiles that can take out nuclear command centers? How do you verify an AI system or a cyber weapon that could disable an entire country's arsenal without firing a shot? The old treaties never had to deal with any of this. So here's the bottom line. You take 3 major nuclear powers, you throw in a bunch of new, really hard-to-track technologies, and you remove all the rules. What you get is a recipe for a chaotic, unpredictable, and frankly incredibly dangerous 3-way arms race.
This new reality leaves the world's nuclear powers, especially the United States, facing a pretty stark choice. When you look at it, there are basically 2 competing schools of thought on how to move forward in this new, rule-free world.
On one side, you have the argument for a buildup. The logic here is that the US has to expand its arsenal to be able to deter both Russia and China at the same time. But on the other side, you have the argument for a New Deal. Proponents say a buildup is just going to kick off a massively expensive and dangerous arms race that makes nobody safer.
And make no mistake, this is not just some theoretical debate in a think tank. The wheels are already turning. The United States is actively developing new nuclear weapons systems right now, like this sea-launched cruise missile. So the path toward a potential buildup is already being paved.
Okay, but what about that other path? If an arms race is so obviously dangerous, why isn't everyone scrambling back to the negotiating table? Well, as it turns out, trying to forge a new agreement in this new era, the obstacles are just massive.
So in this last section, let's really weigh those huge challenges against the powerful shared interests that just might be able to pull the world back from the edge of an all-out nuclear free-for-all.
The hurdles are just enormous. Diplomatically, trying to get 3 major rivals in a room is a nightmare. Technologically, how do you even begin to verify a cyber weapon? Politically, at least in the US, our own polarization makes ratifying any treaty a gigantic challenge. And layered on top of all of that, Russia's history of breaking past deals just poisons the well from the start.
But even with all of that, there's a really powerful counter-argument pushing against a new arms race. And it's simple. Cold, hard, national self-interest. The fact is, all 3 of these powers have very strong, very practical reasons to want to avoid a totally unrestrained competition.
Let's just break that down. For the US, our own nuclear modernization program is already way behind schedule and massively over budget. Our industrial base just isn't ready for a rapid buildup. For Russia, its economy is a fraction of America's, and it desperately needs to spend its money rebuilding the army it's burning through in Ukraine. And for China, if their buildup provokes a full-blown American response, they'd probably end up in a worse strategic spot than if some rules were still in place.
And this really gets to the heart of the paradox here. A nuclear arms race is a game nobody wins. It's a massive drain on money and resources that, at the end of the day, doesn't actually make you any more secure. In fact, it probably makes you less secure. All 3 countries would just end up poorer and facing a much more dangerous world.
And so this is the question we're left with. The old rulebook, the one written for a 2-player world, is gone for good. That shared, fundamental interest in survival is still there. But can these new rivals, in this much more complex, much more hostile world, find a way to write a new set of rules before their competition spins completely out of control? The answer to that question is going to define all of our security in the 21st century.